Alright guys, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. I hope you guys like it, and if you have any feedback about it, let me know. Alright, so this story I'm about to read is about a family from Kansas named the Benders. Nowadays they're known as the Bloody Benders. So let's do this. Alright, in 1870, 5 families of spiritualists settled in western Labette County, about 7 miles northeast of where Cherryville would be platted a year later. One of these families was the Benders, comprised of John Bender Sr., his wife Almira, son John Jr., and daughter Kate. A cult-like group, the families chose from several available claims and began to make their homes. John Bender Sr. chose a 160-acre section on the western slopes of the mountains that today continue to bear their name. The property was located directly on the Osage Mission Independence Trail that operated from Independence to Fort Scott. His son chose a narrow piece of land just north of his father's. However, he never lived on his claim nor made any improvements. The family soon built a small one-room frame cabin, a barn, corral, and dug a well. Inside the wooden cabin, the area was partitioned with a large canvas, creating living quarters in the back and a small inn and store in the front. A crude sign was hung above the front door that advertised groceries. To the many travelers along the Osage Trail, the little store carried a few supplies, such as powder, shot, groceries, liquid, and tobacco, sold meals, and provided a safe overnight resting place to the strangers along the road. Keeping mostly to themselves, the Benders appeared to simply be struggling homesteaders who worked hard to earn their living like the other area pioneers. Immigration from Germany. John Bender Sr. was 60 years old when he arrived in the area. His wife, about 55, standing over 6 feet tall, John was a giant of a man who, because of his piercing black eyes set deeply under his huge, bushy brows, earned him the nickname of Old Beetle-Browed John. His ruddy face, mostly covered by a heavy beard, sullen expression, and long hair often led him being described as a wild and woolly-looking man. John Bender Jr. was a tall, slender man of about 25 who was handsome with auburn hair and a mustache, speaking English fluently with a German accent. He was said to have been social, but he was prone to laugh aimlessly, which led many people to think of him as a half-wit. Daughter Kate was the friendliest of the bunch, speaking good English with just a slight accent and bore cultivated social skills. A beautiful girl of about 23. She was quick to laugh and talk to strangers. She and her brother, John, often attended Sunday school at nearby Harmony Grove and were readily accepted in the community. When the Benders opened their store and inn in 1871, many travelers would stop for a meal or supplies. However, some of those men who frequently carried large sums of cash with the intention of settling, buying stock, or purchasing a claim began to go missing. When friends and family began to look for them, they could trace them as far as Big Hill country of southeast Kansas before they could find no trace of the lost travelers. These first few missing travelers did not raise an overall alarm in the area, as it was not uncommon during those days for men to simply continue their journey westward. However, as more time passed, the disappearance became more frequent, and by the spring of 1873, the region had become strife with rumors, and travelers began to avoid the trail. When neighboring communities started to make slanderous insinuations, the Osage Township called a meeting held at the Harmony Grove Schoolhouse in March to see what, if anything, could be done. About 75 people attended the gathering, including both Bender men. The discussion began regarding the 10 people who were reported missing, including a well-known independent physician named Dr. William H. York. With the full realization that there truly was a major problem in their township, the group decided to search every farmstead between Big Hill Creek and Jump Creek. When most of the attendees volunteered to have their premises searched, the Benders remained silent. Sometime later, Billy Toll, a neighbor of the Benders, noticed that the Benders Inn was abandoned and their animals unfed. Toll reported the news to Leroy F. Dick, the township trustee, and a search party was soon formed, which included Dr. York's brother, Colonel A. M. York of Fort Scott. When the men arrived at the property, they found the cabin empty of food, clothing, and personal possessions. They were also met by a terrible smell inside the abandoned inn. A trapdoor, nailed shut, was discovered in the floor of the cabin. Prying it open, the men found a 6-foot deep hole that was filled with clotted blood, causing the terrible odor. However, there were no bodies in the hole. Finally, the men physically moved the entire cabin to the side and began to search beneath, but no bodies were found there either. Continuing, they began to dig around the cabin, especially in an area the Benders had utilized as a vegetable garden and orchard. At the site of the freshly stirred depression in the earth, they found the first body, buried head downward, with its feet scarcely covered. The corpse was that of Dr. William H. York, his skull bludgeoned and his throat cut from ear to ear. The digging continued the next day, and 9 other bodies and numerous dismembered body parts were found, including a woman and a little girl. The burial site was christened Hell's Half Acre, and another brother of Dr. York, a lawyer and a state senator residing in Independence, offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to the Benders family's arrest. On May 17th, the governor, Thomas Osborne, added to the amount of offering a $2,000 reward for the apprehension of all 4. Word of the gruesome murder spread fast, and thousands of people flocked to the site, including news reporters from as far away as New York and Chicago. The Bender cabin was ripped apart by gruesome souvenir hunters, right down to the bloody bricks that lined the cellar. Bit by bit, the story of the Benders was pieced together. The Benders were obviously not what they appeared. In fact, they weren't even a true family. The only ones related were Ma and Kate Bender. When the visitors stopped in for a meal, they were seated at a table with their back to the large canvas that separated the inn from the living quarters. Then Kate would begin to charm them in with her social skills, flirting and revealing her psychic gifts. As the men gave their full attention to the alluring Kate, Pa and John Bender, hiding behind the canvas, would strike the unsuspecting traveler in the skull with a hammer. Ma Bender and Kate would then rifle the body for money, pushing him through the trapdoor into the hole below the cabin, where Kate would slit his throat. During the night, the body would then be buried in the garden behind the house. Their downfall was the murder of a father and daughter named Launcher and that of Dr. William York, who had come looking for the missing pair. In the winter of 1872, Mr. Launcher and his daughter had left Independence for Iowa, but were never heard from again. In the spring of 1873, Dr. York took it upon himself to go looking for the Launchers, stopping at the homesteads along the trail to ask questions. Though he reached Fort Scott unscathed and started to return to Independence, about March 8th, he never reached home. Dr. York had two brothers, one living in Fort Scott and the other in Independence. Both knew of his travels, and when he failed to return home, an all-out search began for the missing doctor. Colonel A.M. York, leading a contingency of some 50 men, began to question every traveler along the trail and to stop at the area homesteads. One of the places was the Bender Inn. The Benders tried to help by admitting that Dr. York had stopped at their place, but convinced the search party that he had left and was probably waylaid by Indians. Even Kate, with her clairvoyant abilities, attempted to search for the missing doctor, to throw away any suspicion from herself. After Colonel York's visit and the meeting at the Harmony Grove schoolhouse, the Bender family fled. It was only a few days later that the homestead was found abandoned, and the search party began to discover the grisly remains of the bodies. The diggers were astounded to find what would become known as one of America's first mass murder burial grounds, as body after body was uncovered. 10 bodies were found in the Bender's apple orchard, including Dr. York and the people he had been searching for, Mr. Launcher and his daughter, just 7 or 8 years old. More gruesomely, though, the little girl's body was found to have multiple injuries. None of them would have caused death, and it was speculated that the poor lass may have been buried alive. Of the discovery of her remains, the Kansas City Times reported, the little girl was probably 8 years of age and had long, sunny hair and some traces of beauty on the countenance that was not yet entirely disfigured by decay. One arm was broken. The breastbone had been driven in. The right knee had been wrenched from its socket, and the leg doubled under the body. Nothing like this sickening series of crimes had ever been recorded in the whole history of the country. Other bodies found in the garden were those of Henry Mackenzie's mutilated remains, 3 men by the name of Ben Brown, W.F. McCarty, and John Geary, as well as an unidentified male and female. Johnny Boyle's body was found in the well. Dismembered parts of several other victims were also discovered, but could never be identified. 4 other bodies with crushed skulls and slit throats were also found outside the property, in Drum Creek and on the other surrounding prairies. For all these deaths, the Benders gained only about $4,600, 2 teams of horses and wagons, a pony, and a saddle. Because some of the travelers were carrying nothing of value, it's widely speculated that the Benders killed simply for the bloody thrill of it. As word of the grisly murder spread, more and more travelers came forward to tell their own stories of narrow escape, including one gentleman by the name of William Pickering. When he refused to sit with his back to the canvas because of its disgusting stains, Pickering said that Kate Bender threatened him with a knife, at which point he fled the premises. A Catholic priest said that he too fled when he saw one of the Bender men concealing a large hammer. After following a fresh trail of wagon tracks, a search party found the Benders had gone to the town of nearby Thayer, some 12 miles to the north. There, they purchased tickets on the northbound Leavenworth, Lawrence, and Galveston train to Humboldt. Several days later, the Benders team and wagon were found a short distance away, the horses nearly starved. Upon further investigation, Captain James B. Ransom, the train's conductor, said that John Jr. and Kate disembarked at Chanute and took the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad train south to the Red River County near Denison, Texas, which was then terminus of the railroad. Allegedly, the pair then fled to a tough outlaw colony along the border of Texas and New Mexico. Meanwhile, Ma and Pa Bender continued on the train north of Kansas City, where it was believed they transferred to the train headed to St. Louis. Attempts to capture the bloodthirsty family were immediately made by both law officers and vigilantes alike, though no one ever collected the reward offered. Rumors began to fly of several parties who had captured and killed the Benders. One vigilante group claimed to have shot down the men and Ma Bender and buried Kate alive, as the witch they believed her to be. Another group claimed they had caught the Benders while escaping to the south and lynched them before throwing their bodies into the Verdigris River. Yet another group claimed to have killed the Benders during a gunfight and buried their bodies on the prairie. For all these deaths, I think I read that already. Shoot. However, none of these tales were ever confirmed, nor bodies found, so most thought that the Benders had managed to escape. For years, sightings of Ma Bender and Kate were reported, and in 1889, 2 women were actually extradited from Michigan on the charge. Though the pair were jailed, the case was eventually dropped for the lack of evidence. Alright, well, I hoped you enjoyed my story, and if you guys want me to do another one of these, just let me know.